My name is Gabriella Monroe, and I'm 34 years old. In many people's eyes, I've always just been the quiet older sister who lived far away, rarely mentioned, often forgotten. But on the day my younger brother Ryan got married at a lavish resort nestled in the mountains of Colorado, I returned with one simple intention: to wish him happiness. What I didn't expect was to be greeted with a tray of champagne and a cold stare from my mother. "We're short on servers. Go help out for a bit," she said. When I stood frozen, she leaned in and whispered, her words slicing like a blade. "You owe this family more than you realize." And so there I was, dressed in a modest but elegant gown, holding a tray of drinks, standing off in a corner like a stranger at my own brother's wedding. I didn't demand attention. I didn't intend to disturb the celebration. But I didn't realize that my silence would become the spark for a revelation that would bring the entire room to a standstill. An older gentleman, one of the VIP guests, locked eyes with me and paused mid-step. He approached slowly, his voice reverent. "Ma'am, are you Gabriella Monroe, the CEO of this resort chain? Have you ever been dismissed in a place that was supposed to feel like home? Treated like a nobody until the truth left everyone speechless? If you've ever felt that way, leave a comment below. Hit like and subscribe to follow my journey, where every word, every look, begins to reveal truths my family has never dared to face. Because from that moment on, the wedding was no longer a celebration of love, it became a stage for undeniable truths. And I was no longer just a bystander. I still remember how that moment felt, everyone's eyes suddenly fixed on me, not because of the tray in my hand, but because of the name they had just heard escape the lips of a man with influence, Gabriella Monroe. I'd carried that name my entire life, but never before had it been spoken with such respect in a room full of people who used to disregard me. I smiled faintly and said nothing. The man, Charles Delaney, kept staring at me like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. After a few stunned seconds, he set his glass on the nearby table and took a step closer. "You're the investor behind this resort chain?" he asked, his voice low, laced with both curiosity and admiration. I nodded. Across the room, my mother Margaret stood frozen. Next to her was Ryan, still trying to piece together what had just happened. And Amber, the bride, gave a slight smirk as if she thought Charles must have been mistaken. I didn't blame them. Their entire lives, they had known me as the distant older sister with no clear future, working some vague office job far away. Growing up, they'd called me names they didn't think were cruel. The quiet one, the girl who can't blend in, the mood killer. My mother used to say, "Ryan is the pride of this family. You should be grateful just to be part of it." I grew up like a shadow beside family dinners filled with laughter where Ryan's school stories took center stage, and I was tasked with washing dishes. Whenever guests came over, my mom would take Ryan by the hand and say, "This is my son, smart, polite, everyone loves him." I stood behind her, my name never called. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and birthday, I helped out behind the scenes. But when the family photo was taken, I always ended up at the edge of the frame almost unintentionally. It wasn't for lack of trying. I made efforts to fit in, to speak more gently, to check on Mom when her headaches returned, to bring Ryan gifts on his birthday. But those gestures fell into a void. Where Ryan received hugs and praise, I got a dismissive glance, or worse, a cold frown. "Gabriella, stop making everything dramatic." When I turned 18, I didn't leave home in a storm of shouting or tears. I simply packed my things and left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'll be gone for a while." No one called to ask where I went. No one asked if I was coming back. 12 years later, I returned not because they needed me, but because I had grown strong enough to face them without flinching. In all that time, not once did I receive a check-in call. Not even a "how are you doing?" from the woman who gave birth to me. I built my career from the ground up. I started as a front desk receptionist at a small roadside lodge in Montana. I studied at night, worked during the day, and saved every penny to launch my own hospitality management company. In my 7th year, I acquired a rundown chain of resorts in Colorado and transformed them into luxury destinations for high-end travelers. I was the engine behind every operation, but always remained anonymous in contracts to maintain my distance from those who never truly saw my worth. Which is why my mother had no clue. In her eyes, I was still Gabriella with the desk job, barely worth acknowledging. Until today. I looked straight at her. Her eyes no longer held command or coldness, but a dawning confusion. She recovered quickly, like a reflex. Gabriella, put the tray down. You're confusing the guests. Charles Delaney raised an eyebrow. I'm not confused, Mrs. Monroe, he said, not taking his eyes off me. I signed a partnership deal with her nearly 2 years ago. Thanks to her, this resort chain reached Forbes 5-star status. Ryan blinked. Amber let out a scoff. You must be mistaken, sir. Gabriella works reception somewhere. Still, I said nothing. I didn't need to explain myself to people who never thought I amounted to anything. Charles turned toward Amber. His voice wasn't loud, but firm enough to quiet the entire front section. She's the president of Monroe Lux Hospitality. I'm afraid you're all enjoying the services she provides on your special day. People started to turn. Some faces that had laughed with Amber or toasted with my mother were now frozen in silence. I placed the tray gently on the nearest table. My gaze remained fixed on my mother. You owe this family more than you think. Her words echoed in my mind like a slow, searing wound. I pressed my lips together. If anyone's in debt, it's not me. The air thickened. My mother gripped her purse strap, her hands trembling ever so slightly. But she still tried to maintain her composure. I don't know what you're trying to prove. Let's not ruin a joyful day dredging up old things. I allowed myself a quiet smile. Behind me, I heard the grand doors swing open, soft instrumental music continuing to play as if unaware a small earthquake had begun to shake the room. I hadn't come here to humiliate anyone, least of all my brother. But I also couldn't stay silent while truth remained buried yet again. I used to believe if I tried long enough, I'd eventually be seen. But I've learned some people will never look no matter how clearly you stand before them. Today, dressed carefully for my brother's milestone, in a space I helped design and build, I was no longer the girl sent to polish glasses. I was Gabriella Monroe, and they would have to see me for who I truly am. I still remember the moment I received Ryan's wedding invitation, a pearl-white envelope with embossed lettering, faint perfume lingering in the paper, evoking elegance and distance all at once. I turned the envelope over and over in my hand, hesitant to open it. It was late afternoon, the golden light of day spilling across my desk in the office, casting a warm glow completely at odds with what I was feeling inside. At the top of the invitation were the names of the couple, Amber Lancaster and Ryan Monroe. Warmly invite Gabriella to celebrate with the family on our special day. The font was beautiful. The message, distant. It had been so long since I saw my name, printed alongside Ryan's. I waited 3 full days before responding. Part of me wanted to toss it in a drawer, lock it away with all the unnamed memories. But there was one promise I hadn't forgotten, something I told my grandmother as she lay in bed near the end, her vision fading, her hand still clinging to mine like she was holding on to the last bit of warmth. Give your family another chance, sweetheart. Even just once. Don't close that door forever. She was the only one who never turned her back on me, the only one who still saw me whenever I was pushed aside. She believed in change, believed in the power of forgiveness. I couldn't promise to forget, but I nodded, because the love I had for her remained whole. And so, I decided to go. No announcements, no noise, no one accompanying me. I booked my flight under my real name but used my company email to reserve a room at the resort where I was the largest shareholder, though no one in my family had ever known. I wanted everything to unfold naturally. I wasn't there to boast or reclaim a place. I came because I had grown, and I wanted to see how the people who once called me an outsider were living now. I arrived in Colorado 2 days early to check the facilities. Even though the management team handled everything, I still wanted to make sure all was in order, not for my brother's wedding, but for the important guests who had reserved villas nearby. They had nothing to do with my family, but they were my clients, and I respected every experience they had here. On the first day, I met Olivia, the wedding coordinator at the resort. She looked surprised when she learned I was with Monroe Holdings. You want us to keep your identity private? Olivia asked, her tone calm and professional. I nodded. I'm just a sister attending a wedding. No one needs to know more than that. She smiled softly, asked nothing further, and that reassured me. From the very first days I worked in hospitality, I learned one thing. Discretion is its own form of class. On the wedding day, I wore a pale blue dress that was fitted but understated, nothing flashy. I arrived on time, stood in line to check in like any other guest. The staffer checking the list didn't recognize me, nor did they need to. I was simply the groom's sister. I saw my mother again in the small garden behind the hall. She was standing with two older women, old friends by the look of it, her face glowing with pride as she spoke about Ryan is now a business director at a major car company, and Amber really is the perfect daughter-in-law. When I walked over, she glanced at me quickly, then turned to them. Oh, my daughter. Gabriella, she lives somewhere back east, works an office job, hasn't been home in years. I stayed silent, not sad, not angry. Just that familiar feeling of being a stranger wandering into someone else's gathering. Ryan came over soon after, grinning, hugging me, loosely as though 2 years apart was no more than a missed coffee. You really came? I wasn't sure you would. I smiled faintly. The invitation did say so. Amber was radiant, as any bride would be. She couldn't quite hide the way she sized me up, though she quickly masked it behind red lipstick and a charming laugh. Gabriella, so glad you're here. I heard from Ryan's mom that you work office admin in Boston? Must be. Stable enough. I met her gaze steadily. Stable enough to live. The air paused for a beat, then my mother slipped in, her voice light as a breeze but sharp enough to sting. Gabriella, it seems the service team is short-staffed. Could you help carry drinks out in the hall? You know, just to help the family. I froze. The words hurled me back to the years I was ordered to fetch chairs, wrap gifts, set the table because you're the older sister. You should sacrifice. Before I could reply, she leaned closer, whispering like an icy, Blade, you owe this family more than you think. I looked at her for a long moment, not out of shock, but because I couldn't believe that after all these years she still saw me that way. All my effort, every time I stood back up from failure, none of it, in her eyes, meant as much as one simple call for Ryan. I walked away. Not out of obedience, but to avoid a pointless confrontation. I went behind the main hall, picked up a tray of wine myself, and blended into the crowd like a shadow. No one noticed who I was. No one looked at me for more than 3 seconds. Until Charles Delaney walked in. And the moment he spoke my name not with casual recognition, but with unmistakable respect, everything began to shift. I hadn't come to cause a stir. I didn't want to be the center of attention. But truth, no matter how carefully buried, will eventually step into the light. And when it does, it doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand tall, steady, and meet the eyes of those who once turned away. I never imagined I would be at a wedding reception, dressed as a guest, but holding a tray like a server. The role itself didn't shame me. I had scrubbed floors, cleared tables, carried heavy trays when I first started out. But the way I was pushed into it, under my mother's dismissive gaze and Amber's mocking laugh, made my chest tighten. My mother didn't say much, just a slight tug of my arm, a polite command wrapped in civility. Help the event team. They're short-handed. Then she shoved the tray into my hands as though that was where I belonged. I lifted my face to her, ready to ask why, but her cold, decisive glance silenced me. I said nothing. Amber stood nearby, her arm looped through Ryan's, her face glowing under the shimmer of her gown. When she saw me with the tray, she giggled softly, her laugh pitched just for me. Fits you, really, she murmured, better than standing alone in the corner like a shadow. I tightened my grip around the silver tray, not from rage, but to keep it from slipping in front of everyone. Ryan said nothing. My brother turned away as though he hadn't heard, focusing instead on someone speaking on stage. Maybe he was embarrassed, maybe indifferent, or maybe simply too used to me being the one left out. I walked slowly down the rows of tables, pouring wine for guests with a practiced smile. No one noticed anything out of place. Perhaps they assumed I was part of the staff. Fine by me. Invisibility can be the perfect shield. That's how it would have stayed until an older gentleman entered from the right side of the hall. He wore a dark suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture tall and steady. His face bore the sharpness of someone seasoned, someone too experienced to be fooled by appearances. I approached with my tray, tilting it gently, the red wine glistening in the glass. "Cabernet from Napa, sir?" I asked, smiling softly, my voice calm and even the way. I'd learned behind reception desks, years ago. But instead of reaching for a glass, he looked directly at me. "You're Gabriella Monroe?" he asked, his voice deep but certain. I froze. For a split second, I considered saying no to avoid attention. But his eyes were sincere, without doubt or suspicion. I nodded. His face lit with recognition. He placed his hand over his heart, then bowed his head with genuine respect. "It's an honor to meet you. I'm Charles Delaney. Thank you for taking on our investment project last year. You have an extraordinary vision." His words rang out clear, and I wasn't the only one who heard them. Everything around us seemed to slow. People turned. Whispers began rippling from the left tables. My mother stood not far away, frozen with a glass in her hand. Amber stopped smiling. Ryan pulled out his phone, visibly rattled. Maybe he was checking the name Delaney. Maybe he was checking the name Gabriella Monroe, his own sister, someone he'd never really bothered to know. I set the tray down gently on the nearest table and straightened my back. I didn't need to explain, didn't need to defend. Charles had already spoken for me, with a truth no one could deny. "I didn't expect you here," he continued warmly. "I just came from a board meeting in Aspen, and they all spoke of you as a model of brand transformation. Some members still can't believe this resort chain was once nothing more than underperforming assets." I smiled faintly. "Thank you for being here today. It's good to see you again." Charles nodded, then turned to a woman beside him. "This is Mrs. Lawson, an investment advisor. She was deeply impressed with how you coordinated during the post-pandemic phase. She always told me, if there's anyone clear-headed enough to rebuild from ashes, it's Gabriella Monroe." Before I could respond, my mother stepped forward. Her expression was unfamiliar, nothing like the woman who had just pushed her daughter to carry drinks not long ago. "Hello, I'm Gabriella's mother." Her voice softened, as if she were trying on a role she had never rehearsed. "It's such a surprise to see you here. I didn't know you two were acquainted." Charles raised an eyebrow politely, extending his hand. "You have a remarkable daughter. I've worked with many young professionals, but Gabriella is one of the few who upholds her principles without losing flexibility." Amber moved awkwardly from her spot, visibly unsettled. She didn't say a word, but her eyes had lost their earlier disdain. Ryan remained still, unmoving, seemingly trying to process everything. I looked directly at my mother. She met my gaze for only a second before turning away. No one spoke it aloud, but the atmosphere had completely shifted. Names, glances, scattered fragments were aligning into a picture no one in my family was prepared to confront. I didn't move. I stood, beneath the pale golden glow of the crystal chandeliers, in the hushed silence of a celebration that should have been filled only with laughter. That silence, in some ways, echoed louder than any insult I had ever received. And I understood this wasn't the end. But at the very least, the mask they had forced onto me for more than a decade had begun to crack. I stood there, in the dazzling hall under the hum of background music, as though no one had just witnessed a revelation that left the room breathless. But the air was no longer the same. Laughter thinned, and half-hidden stares began turning toward me, toward the woman one of the most powerful investors had called by name, not as a guest, but as an owner. Charles Delaney stepped away to greet a few old acquaintances, leaving me face to face with a line of uncertain eyes. I slowly turned. My mother was still there. She could no longer hide the disarray in her gaze. I could see the turmoil rising inside her, a mix of anger, doubt, and something else, fear. Amber stepped forward, tugging Ryan along behind her. She forced a smile, trying to bury her unease beneath layers of makeup and practiced charm. Gabriella, you're really impressive. I didn't know you did. Something connected to this place. You are very discreet. I didn't answer immediately. I looked straight into Amber's eyes, then slowly nodded. There's nothing remarkable. Everyone's busy with their own lives. I only try to do my part well. The words seemed harmless, yet they stiffened her posture. She forced another smile for a few seconds before retreating slightly, avoiding my eyes. Ryan, standing beside her, still hadn't spoken. He avoided looking at me. His hand gripped a glass of wine, though he didn't drink. After a while, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you ever tell the family? I turned to him. Did anyone ever ask, Ryan? He froze, his gaze faltering. I wasn't bitter. It was simply the truth. No one had ever asked where I lived, what I worked on, whether I was happy. They only looked at me as though I should always step back to keep the peace. From across the room, I caught sight of Mr. Delaney speaking with two guests from the media industry. One of them, Mrs. Elizabeth Jennings, who managed a specialized real estate investment news network, was nodding, her eyes flicking quickly toward me. I understood what that meant. Even though no official reporter was present, what had just happened would soon carry my name beyond these walls. I walked toward the bar. Olivia, the resort's event manager, stood there, clearly having witnessed everything from the beginning. She leaned slightly as I approached. Are you all right? Olivia asked softly, just for me. I nodded. Thank you. It was unexpected, that's all. She studied me for a moment, then added, I think it might be best to rearrange your next placement during the ceremony. Or would you like me to assign someone to escort you backstage? I shook my head gently. No need. I want to stay here, exactly where I'm standing. She understood. Olivia was sharp, accustomed to handling demanding clients, but she never overstepped. That was a quality that made me trust her from the beginning. When I turned back, Margaret, my mother, had stepped away from the crowd and was standing by the wooden balcony overlooking the distant mountains. I walked over, standing silently beside her. After a pause, she spoke, not turning her head. How long have you been keeping this from us? I exhaled slowly. I wasn't keeping it from you. No one ever wanted to hear. She didn't reply. The mountain breeze swept through, light but cold. A long silence stretched between us, until she tilted her head slightly toward me. So, everything you have now, you built yourself? Her voice held a mix of doubt and something close to caution. I kept my eyes on the deep purple horizon. Step by step. From the moment I walked out of that house, no one helped. No one paved the way. No one asked the questions. So I found the answers myself. She watched me a moment longer, then turned away. I never thought you'd amount to much. The words didn't surprise me. But hearing them spoken aloud, here, in the middle of a wedding, after everything that had just unfolded, chilled me more than the mountain wind. I didn't respond. She continued. You were always different, never fitting in, not like Ryan. I used to wonder if maybe you wanted to set yourself apart. I turned to face her. I didn't choose to stand apart, I said quietly. I was put aside. Her brows knit together. From the very beginning, I went on, steady, without accusation. I knew I wasn't the center of this family, but I still hoped for something. A glance, a question. A place in the family photo where I wasn't at the edge. She turned her face away, saying nothing. I turned, about to leave the balcony, when she added softly, I used to fear, if I gave you too much attention, you'd overshadow Ryan. I stood still. You were stronger, always. So I thought, maybe you didn't need it. I let out a faint smile, not looking back. You were wrong. I returned to the main hall, where everything seemed to continue as though nothing had happened. But I knew, inside everyone present, something had shifted. A stillness spread, like ripples across water, and its echoes wouldn't fade easily. I walked slowly down the west corridor of the banquet hall, where warm light from wall sconces gave a comforting glow, but not enough to ease the chills sinking into my skin. Olivia gave me a small nod from afar, then closed the private room door behind me. Inside that room, decorated simply but discreetly, my mother was already seated, her pale lavender gown cascading over the velvet chair. Ryan leaned against the corner of the table, his hands in his pockets, his eyes downcast on the floor. No one said a word when I stepped in. The air was heavy, so taut that even a strong breath might have shattered the silence between the three of us. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from them. No crossed arms, no hint of provocation. I simply sat there, calm, as if it was finally time to say everything that should have been spoken long ago. My mother was the one to begin. "You deliberately humiliated us." Her voice was dry, each word scraping through gravel and dust. "Right at your brother's wedding." I lifted my gaze to her, free of anger. I didn't say anything. One man knew who I was, and he spoke it. "I never intended to humiliate anyone." She let out a sharp laugh. "If your intentions were good, you wouldn't have hidden it for so long. You came back and let someone else expose the truth in the middle of a wedding. Do you think I don't see through your schemes?" "I have nothing to scheme," I answered evenly, "because I never wanted to compete with anyone for money, affection, or a place in this family." Ryan shifted slightly, uneasy. He looked at me, and for the first time that evening, his eyes didn't avoid mine. "Then why didn't you ever tell me about how successful you are?" His voice was rushed, tinged with confusion, as if he were trying to rebuild the picture from scratch. I held his gaze, my tone steady, because I thought if no one needed to know, then there was no need to tell. Everyone walks their own path. No one in the family ever asked how I was doing. I didn't resent it, and I wasn't looking for recognition. My mother sighed, rubbing her hands together in tension. "Stop pretending to be noble, Gabriella. You've always acted like you needed nothing, as though everyone else in this family is petty and small." "I never acted that way," I replied, eyes fixed on her. "But did you ever ask why I left? Why I didn't come back, didn't call, didn't write?" She froze. I went on, each word spilling like something held too long in my chest, now only wanting release. "I found Dad's trust contract, Mom, 3 years ago. It clearly stated he wanted to leave me a separate fund as a gesture of compensation, a small safeguard in case I needed it. But I never received it." Her face drained of color in an instant, then quickly shifted to defense. "You don't understand the circumstances." "I understand," I cut in. "I understand perfectly. Because I quietly verified it. I hired a law office in another state to re-examine the transfer records. There was a signature, looked like mine, but it wasn't. And there was no proof I ever received that money." Ryan jerked in surprise. He looked at me, then turned to Mom. "What? Mom, you transferred that trust to me?" She didn't answer. She turned her face away, her hands trembling slightly. I looked at Ryan. "You weren't at fault. You didn't know. The one at fault was the person who believed you deserved it more than me simply because you were the son, the family heir, the child she loved more." Ryan said nothing. Not a word passed his lips. I could see the collapse in his eyes, not from the loss of money, but from the unraveling of everything he had believed. My mother suddenly spoke, her voice slow, choked. "Your father died so suddenly. Everything was chaos. I didn't know what to do. I thought you had left for good, that you wouldn't come back. Ryan was still young, and there was so much to take care of. And so you decided for me, signed for me. Transferred everything to Ryan," I said, my voice low. "And still, for all the years afterward, no one asked if I needed anything." She didn't deny it. Ryan shot up from his chair, pacing a few steps toward the window, his back to us. I knew he was holding something in. Maybe anger, maybe shame. I hadn't come here to reclaim money. I had far more than what my father left behind, but I needed them to see what they had tried so hard to ignore. I wasn't a stranger. I was his child, her daughter, Ryan's sister. And I had been the one left standing silent at the edge while every door slammed shut. I stood, walked to the table, and pulled a slim envelope from my bag. This is a photocopy of the original contract. I've sent the original to my attorney, not to sue, just to confirm. I laid it on the table, then lifted my eyes from them. I don't need apologies. I don't need explanations. But I need you to know that everything I've achieved didn't come from luck, didn't come from anyone's help. It came from my own hands, the same hands this family abandoned. Ryan turned back, his eyes red. But he said nothing. My mother remained motionless, her hands pressed to her forehead as though an illusion she had clung to for years had just shattered. I looked at them one more time, then turned and left the room. I didn't need to hear anything else. Some truths, once brought into the light, create tremors no one can avoid. And that room, in the moment I closed the door behind me, no longer belonged to those who held the power to deny. As I pulled the door shut, Olivia hurried over, her face unusually grave. In her hand was a phone. "You should listen to this," she whispered, handing it to me. Her eyes met mine for only a moment, but it was enough for me to sense something was wrong. I took the phone. The screen was playing a recording. The voice was unmistakable. Amber. I swear, if I have to hear one more boring thing about Ryan's job, I'll gag. He really thinks I love that whole "I'm a good man, I don't care about money" act? Please. Once this wedding is over, I'll just file for divorce at the right time and take half his assets. The state laws favor the wife, don't they? A giggle followed, then Amber again. And don't worry. He's too naive to suspect anything. Easier to control than a puppy. I ended the recording. A draft from the corridor brushed past. I looked at Olivia, my heart as still as a lake after a storm. She nodded, confirming the recording wasn't some accident. I didn't ask who sent it. Olivia had never been intrusive, and I trusted she wouldn't reveal this unless there was good reason. She interned for me 2 years ago, Olivia explained softly. I wasn't surprised when I received this recording from her. But I thought you should be the first to know. I didn't hesitate long. I handed the phone back to Olivia and said simply, "Thank you. Keep the original safe." Then I stepped back into the banquet hall. The atmosphere had calmed somewhat. Light music drifted again, glasses clinked, small conversations resumed. Yet the tension still lingered everywhere, like a thin layer of dust unsettled. I saw Ryan near the stage, chatting with a few friends. Amber was. Nearby, hands clasped together, her face glowing with a practiced smile. But her eyes wandered, restless, as though searching for someone, perhaps me. I approached unhurried, not seeking to display anything. I only needed to speak with my brother. "Ryan," I called, as he was reaching for a glass of water. He turned, his expression faltering when he saw me. "Sis, I need to speak with you. Just a few minutes." Ryan nodded. We left the hall together, walking down the corridor toward the small, artificial lake behind the resort. No one followed. When we stopped by the wooden railing, I turned to him, my eyes serious. "Are you sure you really know the person you're marrying?" I asked quietly. Ryan frowned. "You're talking about Amber?" I didn't answer. I pulled another phone from my bag, my work phone, used only for internal matters, and played the recording Olivia had given me. I didn't look at Ryan as it played. I let it speak for itself. No explanations, no defense. When Amber's voice rang clear in the still air, I heard Ryan's breath hitch. He said nothing. When the recording ended, the silence stretched so long I thought I'd have to break it. But then Ryan stepped back, bracing himself on the railing, his head bowed. "Are you sure this is real?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Of course," I answered softly. "The person who sent it is a former intern who worked with Amber. She recorded it by accident when Amber thought no one was listening." Ryan stayed silent. I saw his hand curl into a fist. "You could still choose to ignore it," I continued slowly. "Decide she was just venting, or joking. The choice is yours." Ryan lifted his head. His eyes were red, but his gaze had changed. He was no longer the naive younger brother I remembered. He was staring straight into his own disappointment. "You knew all along?" he asked. "Only tonight," I replied. He nodded, looking out toward the lake, where the lights rippled faintly across the surface. "Does Mom know?" "I haven't told her. This is between you and Amber." Another silence fell. I was about to leave, to give him space, when he called softly, "Thank you." I just nodded and walked back toward the main hall. I didn't need to stand there to hear Ryan's decision. I trusted him. And deep down, I knew he understood what was right. When I returned, with the orchestra playing gentle symphonies, Olivia was near the entrance, watching me as if waiting for a signal. I shook my head. No further action was needed. Moments later, Ryan came in, his face pale but resolute. He walked straight to where Amber was chatting with relatives. She smiled when she saw him, but the moment he drew close, it vanished. "I need to talk to you," Ryan said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and firm. Amber let out a nervous laugh, tilting her head. "What's with the drama? You're making me nervous." "Ryan," it didn't answer. He pulled out his phone, tapped play, and held it up to Amber's ear. I couldn't hear their exchange from where I stood, but I saw Amber's face shift from surprise to panic, then collapse into despair. She tried to grab Ryan's arm, but he pulled away. Moments later, Amber ran out of the hall, her wedding gown trailing behind her like a desperate white shadow. Ryan stood there alone, his eyes hollow, as though he'd just lost a world he thought was real. I walked slowly toward him, saying nothing. We stood side by side as the guests began whispering. Everyone could see the wedding unraveling piece by piece, yet no one approached, no one intervened. Ryan let out a strained laugh. "So, the wedding is over." I touched his shoulder lightly. "No, you just chose not to sign your name to a mistake." He looked at me again, this time with weary relief, no longer naive. "Maybe, all this time I never really saw you." I didn't answer. But I believed, for the first time in years, he finally saw me as I was. No more explanations, no excuses, no defense. Some truths only need a moment to be revealed, and once they step into the light, nothing can cover them again. I stood at the edge of the hall, watching the stunned expressions of guests still trying to understand what had just unfolded. None of them could have predicted that this extravagant wedding, hosted in a place designed for perfection, would shatter in ways no one imagined. Ryan had left the center of the hall, now sitting on the steps outside, his hand braced on his knee, staring into emptiness. Amber had vanished, with nothing left but the hurried click of her heels and the drag of her gown in chaos. No music, no applause. Only the scattered clink of cutlery, darting glances, unspoken questions. I stepped onto the stage. The lights hadn't been adjusted, casting my shadow long across the white floral backdrop. An event coordinator nearby looked at me uncertainly, waiting for a clear cue. I didn't wait. I raised my hand gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me." All eyes turned to me instantly. I walked closer to the microphone, without introduction. "My name is Gabriella Monroe," I said, steady and clear. "I am the executive representative of Monroe Luxe Resorts, and the one directly overseeing operations at this property." Whispers erupted. Some raised eyebrows, others leaned in to murmur. I looked directly at the floor below, where my mother sat frozen, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Not far away, Celeste, our cousin from Texas, stared at me, nearly in disbelief. And Uncle Howard, who had brushed me aside at every holiday, was whispering something into his wife's ear. I drew in a deep breath. Due to a serious personnel issue in tonight's event operations, I must announce, this resort will suspend all activity for the next 24 hours in order to conduct internal checks and ensure service quality. The hall stirred. Some guests sat upright, visibly displeased. A man in a tuxedo at the VIP tables leaned toward his wife, speaking low but just loud enough for me to hear. "Is she serious?" "In the middle of a wedding?" I continued, my voice calm. "In addition, I must also announce, The Monroe family, including all members listed under privileged customer status, will be indefinitely suspended from using Monroe Luxe's benefits at any of our locations. Eligibility will be reconsidered only after internal review is complete. The room fell into an uncanny silence. No laughter, no objections. Perhaps because they had never heard anyone speak such words in the middle of a wedding, least of all from someone within the family. I didn't turn to look at my mother, but I could feel her breath catch. From where I stood, she could no longer conceal the fear etched across her face. My mother, the woman who had once declared I didn't belong here, was now hearing the announcement from the very daughter she had treated as a shadow. A few wedding staff quietly began cleaning up in the back. The orchestra didn't dare resume playing. Everything hung suspended after a sudden break, but no one dared to step in. I lowered the microphone and stepped down from the stage. Each step landed heavy in my chest. Not because of the collapse, but because what I had just said was the result of years of silence, of an entire childhood buried under cold favoritism. I felt no regret. From the far end of the hall, Charles Delaney walked toward me, his eyes carrying a discreet respect. "You did well," he said, his voice low, just enough for me to hear. "Sometimes someone has to say what needs to be said, even if the cost is that silence can no longer be maintained." I nodded slightly, lips pressed together. Across the room, I saw Ryan walking back in. He moved quietly toward me, his shoulders hunched, eyes full of exhaustion. I didn't need to ask. He had heard it all. "Maybe you should have done that sooner," Ryan said, not looking at me. Maybe. But when people aren't ready to listen, words only drift away like wind. He exhaled, his face still red around the eyes. "You didn't have to suspend the services. I know that's your way of closing everything, but not everyone in the family." I looked directly at him. "It wasn't to close things," I cut in. "It was to start again with the right people, in the right way." Ryan froze. Then he nodded slowly. My mother stood farther away, her eyes vacant like someone just cast out of the world she had built with glossy layers. I didn't move closer. I didn't walk away either. I let her face what she had always denied. I headed to the reception desk. Olivia was already rearranging the next day's schedule. She looked up, speaking softly. "Do you want me to move you to a private room tonight?" I shook my head. "Leave everything as it is. Tomorrow will. To be a long day." Outside the tall doors, night had settled completely. The garden lights cast upward onto the roof tiles, reflecting in the stunned gazes still lingering. But I didn't care about that. I thought only of one thing. I was no longer walking backward. I no longer had to edge myself into family photos, no longer had to bite down on my pride just to be acknowledged. Everything I had, I created. And if anyone needed to look back, it wasn't me. I walked slowly into the small lounge behind the main hall, where some older relatives sat sipping water, keeping away from the chaos that had just unfolded at the wedding. No one laughed, no one spoke loudly. The atmosphere felt like an unofficial tribunal, everyone waiting for someone else to speak first. My mother sat in the center, back straight, eyes fixed on the empty space before her. She didn't cry, didn't lash out as I once thought she might. She was silent, as though swallowing every shattered mask from the past few hours. Uncle Howard, usually the loudest voice at family gatherings, sat beside Aunt Laura, his face tense. They whispered something when I walked in, then fell silent as my eyes passed over them. I didn't greet them. No need. I stopped, standing opposite my mother. Nearby, Olivia had already placed a small device on the table, a copy of the recording I had asked her to prepare, untouched, unedited. "Do you still want to play the victim?" I asked softly, without spite, without venom. My mother didn't answer. A muscle in her cheek twitched. She knew exactly what I meant. I picked up the device and pressed play. The voice filled the quiet room, sharp as a pin dropping. The boy was too young to handle things. And Gabriella, she's stubborn, cold, ungrateful. The money Harold left her was a mistake. I only corrected it. Signing for her didn't do any harm, she didn't need it. Every word, every syllable rang clear. No one could mistake the voice. The room could deny who was speaking. Some relatives glanced at each other, their looks the same ones I'd grown used to seeing cast at me in family dinners. Heavy with suspicion were now turned on my mother, laced with shock and anger. My mother still didn't move. I looked at Aunt Laura. Her eyes met mine, and she slowly nodded. Rising to her feet, her voice steady though trembling with emotion, she said, "Margaret, I remember when you came to my house, asking me to sign as witness for Harold's assets. You said Gabriella had already agreed, that I only needed to help, but Gabriella never came to see me." I lifted my head toward her. She touched my shoulder lightly, then turned to Uncle Howard. He also stood slowly, hands shoved into his pockets, his gaze heavy on my mother. "And me? I remember that paper had 2 signatures that didn't match, but you told me to trust you, that Harold wanted it that way. I believed you, and now I see how foolish I was." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Faces that had once seen me as the odd one out, the forgotten daughter, now carried traces of guilt. Some relatives lowered their eyes, others exchanged looks as though realizing something they had long refused to believe. My mother finally spoke, her voice low and hoarse. "You don't understand. I had to protect this family. I had to keep everything, because no one else was strong enough to bear it." I stepped closer, my tone lower but firm. "Protect it by forging signatures? By turning your own child into an outsider, even stripping her of her father's smallest inheritance? Did you ever think my silence wasn't ignorance, but my choice not to drag you into court?" Her face drained pale. I didn't shout, didn't cry. I just spoke the truth, stripping the dust from what had been hidden under the rug called family. Aunt Laura sat back down, patting my hand gently. Uncle Howard sighed, his eyes never leaving my mother. I turned to my aunt, speaking softly. "I don't need anyone to take my side. I only need you not to stand behind lies anymore." She nodded, her voice quiet but certain. "You're not alone anymore, Gabriella." I looked around the room. The people I once thought were part of a home I never belonged to now sat silently, facing a truth that could no longer be denied. And I stood among them, no witness required, because the evidence spoke for itself. My mother looked at me, her lips trembling slightly. "You waited for the right moment to strike me," she whispered. I shook my head. I didn't strike anyone. I just stopped straining myself to protect the image of someone who always looked down on me. She turned her face away, her shoulders sagged. Those eyes, once sharp and proud, were now just hollow spaces, draining away from everything she once believed could never collapse. I said nothing more. There was nothing left to say in that room. And I didn't need any further confirmation. I had already crossed that line clearly and decisively. Nothing could drag me back to my old place, the place of someone ignored, belittled, treated like excess. I left the room, leaving silent eyes behind me. I didn't need an apology. Those who knew right from wrong would reflect on their own. As for me, I walked away, lighter than ever. Not because I had won, but because I no longer had to endure. And no one in that house could ever silence me again. I returned to the operations office of the resort once the sky had grown completely dark. Rows of warm yellow lights streamed through the glass windows, casting my shadow on the dark wooden floor. The light wasn't enough to warm the cold that had seeped into me all afternoon, but it wasn't sharp enough to make me shiver anymore. I sat down, leaning back in the chair, my hands still faintly red from hours of clenching tight. On the desk lay the file I had prepared before the wedding, a draft of the trust, transfer contract, along with legal documents from the law office confirming the change of beneficiary. The original was secured in the safe at the main office in New York, but this notarized copy was enough to prove I had completed what I needed to do. I took a fountain pen from my bag and quietly wrote the final lines into the letter, already placed inside a cream-colored envelope. I did not choose to hurt anyone in my family, but I chose not to let them keep hurting me. The original trust will be transferred into the Hartwell Scholarship Fund dedicated to children who have been rejected, who grew up in houses without warmth, yet still held on to hope. May what I never received give someone else the chance to walk with steadier steps. Gabriella Monroe. I sealed the envelope and placed it in the right drawer, the one reserved for completed decisions. All legal procedures tying me to my family had been resolved. From now on, in legal terms, I was no longer a rightful member of the Monroe inheritance system. No disputes, no lawsuits, no dragging anyone down. Simply refusing to belong to a place I was never truly invited into. A faint knock sounded at the door. Olivia peeked in, her voice soft as always. "Do you need anything else from me?" I shook my head, smiling. "Everything's fine now. Thank you for always being on time." She nodded, about to leave, then paused, hesitating. "There's a guest waiting on the garden patio." "It's your mother. Do you want me to?" I lifted my gaze to her, then looked out through the glass window. A small figure sat quietly on the stone bench by the koi pond. Her shoulders shook slightly. She didn't see me, but I saw her clearly. Still in the pale purple gown, now wrinkled, her hair bun falling loose in messy strands. I stood up. "No need for anyone to come. I'll go myself." The granite-paved courtyard leading to the back garden felt cool beneath my steps. I walked slowly. No files, nothing, in my hands. Only steady breaths and a heart no longer torn between anger and pity. My mother turned when she heard my footsteps, her eyes still glistening with tears. She quickly adjusted her posture, trying to reclaim her familiar composure, but I had already seen her slumping. I didn't sit right away. I just stood there, silent, long enough for us both to notice the signs of age now etched more clearly on her face, and the absence of wounds on mine. "I didn't think you'd come out," she said, her voice nearly hoarse. I answered as calmly as I could. "Because you never believed I would choose dialogue over defiance." She lowered her head slightly. "I was wrong about many things. I can't defend myself." I sat down, keeping just enough distance. "I didn't come out here to hear excuses. I only came to say one last thing." She clenched her hands, waiting. I drew a deep breath, eyes fixed on the still water ahead. "I've completed the legal paperwork. I'm no longer tied to the inheritance. I won't take anything back. I won't sue, won't call lawyers. I don't want to drag the family into another cycle of harm." She stayed silent, only nodded faintly, her eyes beginning to blur. "The trust fund Grandpa once left," I continued. "I've turned it into scholarships. Not for the children of this family, but for those who've been left behind the way I once was." I turned to look at her. That's the only thing I've kept from this past. The ability to change something, however small, so someone else won't have to live what I lived. She broke down crying. I didn't look away. I wasn't hardened, nor was I shattered. I was simply a daughter saying goodbye to a mother who had never truly seen me. "I forgive you," I said, slowly, each word deliberate. "But I don't belong here anymore." She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She sat there, clutching her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. Maybe she had lost too much to resist anymore. Maybe she finally understood, even if too late. I stood, breathing deeply. The night air was colder than the afternoon, but it didn't make me shrink. I turned and walked away, not hurried, not reluctant. Each step untied another knot, no heavy footsteps behind me. Only the sound of a woman quietly releasing a mother who couldn't walk with her any further. And I left that garden as if stepping through an old gate long unused, on the other side a different space where I could live as myself, without needing to prove anything. A week later, I returned to New York in the early morning. The city was still crowded, its rhythm still relentless, as if nothing had happened, as if the world didn't care who had just endured what. But for me, everything was different. When the driver stopped in front of the glass tower housing Monroe Lux headquarters, I didn't step out right away. I sat in the car for a few more minutes, my hand resting lightly on the window, eyes lifted to the pale mist opening above the tops of skyscrapers. Outside, people hurried across the sidewalks, car horns blared, heels clicked, Voices called out like an endless symphony. I no longer felt out of place. I went straight up to the 24th floor, the executive office. My secretary, Emily, had been there since early. She handed me a beige envelope, carefully sealed, with soft handwriting across the front, to Gabriella, from someone who should have spoken up sooner. I froze for a few seconds. Then I stepped into my office, quietly closing the door behind me. I didn't turn on the lights. The morning sun was enough to show me every familiar object. The bookshelves, the project files, the leather chair where I had signed contracts with major partners. I slipped off my coat, sat down, placed the envelope in front of me, and opened it. The paper was ivory, the script slanted and a bit shaky. It was the handwriting of Aunt Esther, my mother's half-sister, who lived in Minnesota. She rarely appeared at gatherings, but she always sent cards during the holidays. Dear Gabriella, that day, I was in the room when you played the recording. I heard everything, and I saw what should have been seen long ago. I want to tell you that I should have spoken up sooner. I remember you as the little girl who always sat alone in the garden after holidays, while the other children played together. I remember your eyes when your mother walked past without calling you to eat with the rest. I did nothing. I stayed silent because I thought I shouldn't interfere in someone else's family. But that silence was a mistake, and I am sorry. You walked on your own 2 feet. You stood tall with a strength not everyone has. I am proud of you. And if you ever need someone to be a witness to the truth, remember this. It's time you no longer have to carry everything alone. Aunt Esther. I folded the letter and set it on the desk. No tears, just a quietness that sank deep. A release, like when a door opens and fresh air rushes in without needing permission. I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass. New York stretched out before me, every street like a vein, every light like the heartbeat of a body that never slept. I once thought freedom was a luxury, a promise people made but rarely achieved. But at that moment, looking down at the city, I understood that freedom wasn't about how much power or wealth you had. It was about cutting the invisible rope that tied you to the expectations of others. No longer playing a role just to be acknowledged. No longer pretending to smile in a room full of people who never really saw you. The phone rang. It was Emily on the intercom. Miss Gabriella, the Hartwell Foundation wants to confirm the schedule for announcing the first quarter scholarships. Would you like to sign the press release in person? I turned back to the desk, my voice calm but steady. Move it to tomorrow. Afternoon. Send me the full files to review. I opened my laptop, the inbox filling with lines of pending emails. The Aspen project had reached its final inspection phase. The new resort in Vermont was ready to break ground, and the meeting with 3 strategic investors from France was being rescheduled after the holidays. I worked for nearly 2 hours, then went down to the cafe in the lobby. No one recognized me as the person running the entire building. I liked it that way, just being ordinary, ordering a hot espresso, sitting by the large window, watching people pass by. No one started a conversation. No one put a label on me. A little girl walked past with her mother, curly hair bouncing, clutching a stuffed bear. I looked at her and, without thinking, smiled. Maybe she too had been pulled out of a group for not being well-behaved enough. Maybe she too had been placed at the edge of a photo so the picture would look better. I thought about the scholarship fund. I thought about a child, 10 years from now, receiving a letter that said they had been chosen not because of connections, not to please anyone, but simply because they deserved it. Maybe that was the only reason I held on to everything I'd endured. Not to hate, but to build a door for someone else to step into a different life. And I sat there, in the rhythm of a city that never slowed, quietly finishing a cooling cup of coffee. My heart felt steady, no longer crushed. My mind felt light, like the first breeze of spring. And I felt myself clear, solid, no longer anyone else. I had come home to where I truly belonged, and I wasn't going anywhere else. What do you think of my journey? Has there ever been a time in your life when you bent over backward just to please people who never truly saw your worth? Have you ever hesitated to take a step forward, just because you feared being branded ungrateful or a betrayer? If so, let me tell you this. Your silence is not weakness. But sometimes, letting go isn't about leaving, it's about finding yourself again. It took me many years to understand. Filial duty doesn't mean unconditional submission, and family, without respect, is only a velvet-covered chain. If my story stirs something within you, share your thoughts in the comments below. I always want to hear different perspectives, because every family is its own world, complicated, messy, and real. And if you believe stories like this are worth telling, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more journeys ahead of those once seen as outsiders, of families that seemed beyond repair, and of how we find ourselves amid the ruins we thought we could never rise from.